Over the past 3 years, we've heard countless stories about the appalling and inhumane conditions that the Manus Island detainees were subjected to. The security issues at the centre have been well documented and culminated in the tragic, foreseeable and foreseen February 2014 attack on the centre.
Australia is paying out millions of dollars to refugees stuck in what's being called a living hell of a detention centre. Human rights activists hailed the move, while Conservative politicians condemned it. More than $52 million will go to 1,900 people on Manus Island in what amounts to the country's largest ever humanitarian payout. Human rights campaigners say it means Australia's government is responsible for the welfare of refugees who allegedly have been locked away in deplorable conditions and often face the threat of bodily harm. Meanwhile, former Prime Minister Tony Abbott says the government shouldn't have paid a single cent, accusing the refugees of taking advantage of the system in Australia. Well, to talk about this, I'm joined from Melbourne by human rights lawyer Con Karapanagiotidis. He's the founder and CEO of the Asylum Seeker Resource Centre. And from Sydney, former Conservative politician and MP David Oldfield. Thanks so much for joining us, both of you. Let me start with you, David Oldfield. This class action lawsuit was settled. There are many who say this is hush money. Is that what it was?
Well, it certainly makes sense where the government is concerned to not go ahead with a trial. They would encounter, of course, and incur tens of millions of dollars of costs. And should they win, there'd be no prospect, realistically, of recovering any of those costs, given who the plaintiffs are. OK, so that's money, but isn't there an admission of guilt implicitly there when you throw down tens of millions of dollars to make it go away and prevent a trial where further embarrassing details might come out? The Australian government saying, yes, we did do a lot of things wrong. Aren't they saying that? No, the Australian government, and bear in mind, I don't represent the Australian government. I'm simply putting to you what it is that they themselves are saying. The Australian government is saying that they take no liability and they accept no responsibility in this at all. They deny all of the allegations. They're merely taking an economic decision is what they're saying. Now, you can fairly read into that, if you wish, that they simply don't want this to be debated in court and they don't want 6 to 12 months of news coverage. It wouldn't be unreasonable to take that view. But the government's position is very clear that they do not accept any liability, they deny all the allegations, and for them it's merely an economic decision, as one would take in many legal cases, because, as I noted a moment ago, the people who have taken this case, those who are looking for the compensation, if they were to lose, they would not be those who you could recover costs from. The real winners here in many respects are Slater and Gordon, the law firm. OK, so let's ask Con. Con, the plaintiffs accepted the money, so if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for you, right?
No, look, I think it's really important to understand, first of all, that this settlement is a damning indictment of the Australian government. It's a government that didn't want to see 200,000 pages of eyewitness testimony, 70 eyewitnesses, demonstrating that the government has tortured, abused and mistreated these refugees. These men were never seeking money. These men, in fact, are actually just seeking their freedom. This is a vindication of the fact that the government is responsible for them, has harmed these men, has abused these men, has failed in its duty of care. It's an important first step, but what we really want to see are these men who have been left for more than 4 years in conditions considered torture by the UNHCR to be brought to safety in Australia and to have their suffering come to an end. OK, let's bring in the UN then. David, Con mentioned the UN. We had the UN Special Rapporteur saying offshore detention, as we broaden this out, offshore detention, and this system, as practiced by the Australian government, has tarnished Australia's human rights record and it cannot be salvaged. That's scathing, isn't he? Is he right?
Well, I mean, that's the view of the United Nations, but to be quite frank, Imran, I don't think a lot of Australians are particularly concerned about what the United Nations thinks about the Australian human rights record. Australia is a very decent, very reasonable place that treat people very decent and very reasonably. And, yeah, it's quite frankly a joke to consider anything that the United Nations have to say about Australia. Australia is a soft target for the United Nations. They should be looking at a lot of other countries before they look at Australia when it comes to human rights.
OK, so Con, the Australian government says the UN Special Rapporteur has made mistakes in that report. They also mention and highlight that they've taken in 12,000 Iraqi and Syrian refugees recently. Don't you have to give credit where it's due?
It's really important to understand that Australia has, of all industrialised nations, the most barbaric, cruel refugee policy of any industrialised nation. We're a country that has killed more refugees on Manus Island than we have safely resettled there. We've spent half of UNHCR's global budget that is aided to help 60 million refugees to lock up less than 1,000 men. We are failing refugees and failing in our obligations. As for the Syrian refugees that we're taking, we haven't actually even fulfilled the 12,000 places yet. And it was only after we cut 31% of existing refugee places. Australia's not even in the top 60 globally for the numbers we take on GDP. We're not in the top 40 based on capita, and we're not in the top 20 based on numbers. We are not a generous nation when it comes to refugees. And the majority of Australians, contrary to what David is saying, are shocked by what's happening on Manus and on Nauru, and more than 7 out of 10 Australians want these men immediately evacuated to safety. It is harming us locally, nationally and globally. Go and speak to our business leaders, and our current politicisation and this toxic debate that we're having is harming our standing, in particular in Asia and with our biggest trading partners, and globally. We've gone from being one of the leaders in human rights to becoming an international pariah because of our treatment of refugees and also of Indigenous people.
Okay, David, the man makes quite a compelling case, doesn't he? Can you honestly say that Australia's current policy of offshore detention, whether on Manus or Nauru, is just and humane?
He doesn't make a compelling case at all, quite frankly, Imran. It's just absolute nonsense. I'd be very happy if Con could nominate which country it is anywhere in the world that's no longer dealing with Australia because of this supposed horror of human rights. It's just rubbish, absolutely. Everyone deals with Australia. No one internationally is concerned enough, obviously, to take any steps where Australia is concerned. The United Nations doesn't take any steps except issue press releases. So everything he said where that's concerned is absolute nonsense. Secondly, it must be understood that the people that you're talking about by most Australians are not considered to be refugees. They are asylum seekers who in many respects are shown not to be refugees, and they have come to Australia under the Australian government's terminology of unauthorised maritime arrivals. That's the way they're termed, unauthorised maritime arrivals. These are people that the majority of Australians see as coming to Australia in the wrong way, in the most inappropriate way, and not coming through appropriate refugee protocols. That's the way most Australians actually see this situation. Now, these people that have been interned, that's a matter for the Australian government, or they've been detained. It's the way they have dealt with people who have entered Australia in a way that is seen to be not consistent with our responsibilities to refugees. It is not consistent with the way it is expected people will come to Australia. They have come here by means that are verging on illegal. They are termed unauthorised maritime arrivals.
Okay,
and those people are detained.
Sure, fair enough.
And
let me get
their
Con in.
status is checked.
Fair enough, and you made the point. Let me get Con in here for a final point here. So they're boat people. You come in on a boat. These are the laws of the land. You have to abide by the laws of the land, and you're unlikely to make it into Australia. Con?
Let's be very clear. Everything David said is actual rubbish. More than 80% of these men have been found to be refugees. They are refugees. People have a right to seek asylum. We're a signatory to the Refugee Convention. We should be providing these people with safe passage and safe resettlement. We actually have a moral and legal obligation to do so. Our offshore detention policy has been catastrophic. It is a failure. It is torture. These men are exercising their fundamental human right to a convention that we have been a signatory to for more than 6 decades. And the trashing of the UNHCR and of the United Nations is in itself part of the problem. The dumbing down, the attack on human rights, and the politicisation of immigration harms us all, diminishes us all, and actually takes us back into the dark ages in our country of the White Australia policy, which shouldn't be a surprise, given that David himself used to be part of a white supremacist political party called One Nation, which unfortunately we still have.
Okay, so hold on. So you've
really
thrown that in there. You've thrown that in there. I've got to give David an opportunity to respond. David, are you a white supremacist?
I'm well, as a person of Maori background, I'm not quite sure how that could be the case. And given also the fact that my wife is an Amerindian, a member of the Lakota Sioux tribe, it certainly makes a great deal of nonsense from Con's perspective to suggest that I'm a white supremacist. That is just absolute garbage. Now, I mean, it's just offensive and ridiculous and stupid. Because we're now getting into a matter of personal insult.
It's fair to say you disagree.
The fact of the matter, Imran, the fact of the matter is, Imran, the fact of the matter is that these people are predominantly coming to Australia in a fashion which is not recognised as appropriate by the Australian government, and Con has his fight with them. There's no point insulting me over it. I don't make these decisions, and these people arrive quite safely in Indonesia, where they can get refugee status and where they can claim refugee status, but rather than do that, they choose to come by boat in a way that is not accepted by the Australian government.
Okay,
and
I've got to wrap.
that's why they
David,
find themselves in this situation.
Sorry, David.
That's as simple as it is.
Okay, point well made. I've got to wrap. David and Con.
Thank you, Imran.
I thank you both for joining us.